And so was the $2.4 million she thought she was inheriting. My name is Warren Hodges. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer, bridges, highways, water treatment plants across 3 states. I retired with a paid-off house in Knoxville, Tennessee, a modest investment portfolio, and what I thought was a pretty clear picture of how the rest of my life would go. Quiet mornings with coffee on the back porch, weekends at the lake, maybe some travel once my knees cooperated. What I did not picture was standing on my own front porch at 11 o'clock on Thanksgiving night in 40-degree weather, holding one bag locked out of a house I'd owned for 22 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My son's name is Daniel. He's 34. Smart kid, always was. Picked up math easily, got a partial scholarship to UT, graduated with a degree in business administration. I was proud of him. I'm still proud of the boy he used to be. What happened to that boy, I'm honestly not sure. I think I know who happened to him, but I'll get to that. He met his wife at a work conference in Nashville about 6 years ago. Her name is Brittany. She was sharp, I'll give her that. Well-dressed, quick with a smile. Always said the right thing at the right time. The first time Daniel brought her home for dinner, she complimented my brisket, asked questions about my career, laughed at all my jokes. I liked her. I told Daniel afterward, she's a keeper. I was wrong about that, but I didn't know it yet. They got married 2.5 years later. Small ceremony which I helped pay for. I didn't mind. I wanted Daniel to have a good start. That's what fathers do. The first year was fine. They had an apartment in Murfreesboro, both working, both seemed happy. Then Brittany's company downsized. She lost her job in March and spent about 4 months figuring out her next move, which as far as I could tell meant buying things online and taking long lunches with her friends. Daniel called me in July of that year, said they were struggling with rent. I wired him $2,000. No questions asked. That's what fathers do too, I told myself. Then he called again in September, same situation. I wired another $1,500. In November, he called and said something different. He said, "Dad, Brittany and I have been talking. What if we just moved in with you for a little while? Just until she finds something. 6 months, maybe. We'd help out around the house." I want to be honest here, because I think honesty is the only thing that makes a story like this worth telling. I had a feeling in my gut that said no. Not a loud feeling, just a small, quiet tightening in my chest. I'd been alone in that house for 4 years since my wife Linda passed. I had my routines, my space, my peace, and I think I knew even then, that Brittany wasn't the kind of woman who slipped quietly into someone else's home. But Daniel was my son, and the word no felt like shutting a door in his face. So I said yes. They moved in the first weekend of December with a moving truck that was, I noticed, significantly larger than what 2 people needing a temporary place would require. Brittany had a vanity, a sectional sofa, 3 clothing racks, and what appeared to be an entire second kitchen worth of appliances. My guest bedroom became their bedroom. My den became their living space. My garage became a storage unit for boxes I was never invited to look inside. The first month was tolerable. Brittany cooked a few times, kept things relatively tidy. Daniel and I watched football on Sundays. It felt almost normal. I told myself I'd made the right call. By February, things had shifted. Small things at first. The thermostat moved from 68 to 74 without anyone asking me. The brand of coffee I'd bought for 20 years disappeared, replaced by some flavored stuff Brittany preferred. My chair in the living room, the recliner I'd had since Linda picked it out, ended up pushed into the corner to make room for her sectional. I mentioned the chair once. Daniel said, "Dad, it's just furniture." Brittany smiled and said they'd find a better arrangement soon. They didn't. 6 months came and went, then 9 months. I started asking Daniel about their timeline, gently at first. He'd say Brittany had some promising leads. He'd say the market was tough. He'd say they appreciated my patience. Brittany would overhear and come into the room with that same practiced smile and say, "Warren, you've been so generous. We're going to make it up to you." I noticed she'd stopped calling me Mr. Hodges around the 8-month mark. Nobody asked me if that was all right. The money was the next thing. I'd been paying all the utilities, obviously, plus the mortgage, plus groceries, since Brittany apparently considered shopping her contribution to the household, and often came back with wine and cheese and specialty items that ran the grocery bill up considerably. I asked Daniel once if they could pitch in on groceries, at least. He looked uncomfortable. Later that evening, Brittany came to find me in my office and said very sweetly that they were still getting on their feet, and she was sure I understood. I said I did. I did not, particularly. A year in, Brittany found a new job. I assumed this meant they'd start making plans to leave. Instead, she bought a new car, a lease on a BMW. Daniel mentioned it casually over dinner like it was a minor footnote. I looked at my son across the table, and I didn't say what I was thinking. I just passed the salt. That's when I started writing things down. I kept a small notebook in my desk drawer. Dates, amounts, incidents. Not because I was planning anything yet. Just because something in me. 31 years of engineering, I suppose. 31 years of documenting things carefully before a problem became a crisis. Told me to keep a record. By month 14, Brittany had begun referring to certain parts of the house as our space, in ways that made my skin prickle. She rearranged the kitchen without asking. She replaced the curtains in the living room with ones she'd ordered herself, and charged to a shared household account that Daniel had quietly set up. One I'd technically authorized but didn't realize would be used the way it was being used. When I pointed out I hadn't been consulted on the curtains, she said she thought I'd like a fresh look. When I said I'd preferred the old ones, she laughed lightly and said, "Warren, you didn't even notice them before." She was right that I hadn't noticed them. She was wrong about what that meant. I called my attorney, a man named Phil Garrett. And before anyone asks, yes, he's a real attorney, and no, I'm not going to pretend I saw all of this coming from the beginning, because I didn't. I called Phil mostly just to talk, to think out loud. He listened to everything I said, asked a few questions, and then he said something that sat with me for a long time afterward. He said, "Warren, in Tennessee, if someone lives in your home long enough without a formal rental agreement and you accept any form of contribution, money, labor, anything, a court can start treating them as tenants. That limits what you can do to remove them without going through the formal eviction process." I asked him what that meant practically. He told me. I thanked him, hung up the phone, and sat in my office for about 40 minutes thinking about how I had walked myself into this. I want to stop here for a moment, because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking what some of my own friends said when I eventually told them this story. You're thinking, "Warren, why didn't you put your foot down sooner? Why did you let it go on? Weren't there signs?" And the honest answer is yes. There were signs. There are always signs. But when it's your own child, the signs look different. They look like temporary setbacks. They look like communication problems you can work through. They look like a daughter-in-law who's difficult, but not impossible. The denial doesn't come from stupidity. It comes from love, and from not wanting to believe that the person your child chose, the person your child loves, is someone capable of what you're starting to suspect. I say this not to excuse myself. I say it because I think it's the truth, and I think it might be useful for someone reading this who's in the earlier stages of what I went through. I started making my own plans quietly in late October. I had a conversation with Phil that went into considerably more detail. I also had a conversation with my financial advisor, a woman I'd worked with for years, and I began the process of restructuring certain assets into a revocable living trust. This is not complicated, though it takes time to do properly. The point is that it can be done, and once it's done, the assets inside the trust don't go through probate, can't be easily claimed by strange family members, and are distributed however I specify. I also updated my will. I didn't tell Daniel any of this. I didn't tell Brittany, obviously. I kept my notebook. I smiled at dinner. I watched football with my son on Sundays when he was in the mood for it. I let things go on as they had been going on, because Phil had advised me not to create a confrontation before I was fully prepared for one. Thanksgiving fell on the 28th that year. My sister drove down from Virginia with her husband. My old friend Calvin drove over from Chattanooga. I had 4 people at my dinner table who'd known me for decades, and I was glad to have them. Brittany had invited 2 of her friends from work, without mentioning it to me beforehand. I found out when they knocked on the door at 2 in the afternoon. I said, "Welcome," and meant it, more or less. Dinner itself was fine. Turkey, stuffing, sweet potato casserole, the green bean dish Linda used to make that I'd learned to make myself over the years. Brittany's friends were pleasant enough. Daniel seemed relaxed. My sister caught my eye at one point and gave me a look I knew well. A look that said we need to talk later. But we didn't get the chance. After dinner, the dishes done, my sister and her husband gone home, Calvin gone home, Brittany's friends finally gone. It was around 9:30 at night. I was in my office, sitting at my desk with a cup of decaf, and I heard Brittany and Daniel talking in the kitchen. Voices lower than usual. I wasn't trying to listen, but the house was quiet and sound travels. I heard Brittany say, "He's not going to live forever, Daniel. We need to be practical." I heard my son say something I couldn't make out. I heard Brittany say, "The house alone is worth more than $400,000. And the investments, Phil told me his advisor manages around $2 million, maybe more." I sat very still. She said, "We've been here almost 2 years. We've been managing this household. A good attorney could make the case that we have a vested interest, especially if he starts having health issues." I heard Daniel say, "He's not having health issues." Brittany said, "Not yet." I closed my office door very quietly. I did not sleep well that night. But I was not surprised exactly. You reach a certain point in a thing like this where the worst confirmation still lands like a punch, but you were already braced for it. I lay there in the dark thinking about Linda. Thinking about the 31 years I'd worked, thinking about the house I'd bought when Daniel was 6 years old, when Linda had stood in the empty living room and turned in a slow circle with her eyes closed because she said she wanted to feel the light. In the morning, I texted Phil. He called me within the hour. I told him what I'd heard. He asked if I was certain. I said I was. He said, "All right. We're going to move quickly now. How do you feel about being out of the house for a few days over Christmas?" I said that sounded fine. Christmas that year fell on a Tuesday. On the Sunday before, I told Daniel and Brittany I was driving up to Virginia to spend the holiday with my sister. I'd done it before, so it wasn't unusual. Brittany said, "Have a wonderful time." Daniel hugged me at the door. He said, "Drive safe, Dad." I held on to him a second longer than usual. I don't know if you noticed. I drove to a hotel in Knoxville instead, 20 minutes from my house. On Monday, Phil's team filed paperwork I'd had prepared and signed weeks earlier. On Tuesday morning, Christmas morning, a process server went to my house and delivered formal notice that Daniel and Brittany were being given 30 days to vacate under Tennessee Code Annotated Section 66-28-575. Based on a documented pattern of unauthorized alterations to the property, unauthorized use of a household financial account, and behavior constituting a material breach of the informal tenancy arrangement. I found out later that Brittany answered the door. I was eating eggs and toast alone in my hotel room when my phone started ringing. Daniel. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I let it go. Brittany called from her own number. I let it go. Then Daniel again. Then Brittany. Then Daniel, 3 times in a row. By noon on Christmas Day, I had 61 missed calls between the two of them. By the end of the day, it was 87. Over the next 3 days, it reached 114. I listened to Daniel's voicemails, all of them. I want to be clear about that. I didn't shut him out entirely. In the early ones, he was angry. He said I'd humiliated them. He said I'd blindsided him. He said Brittany was devastated. I noted that in none of those early messages did he say I was wrong about anything, only that I had done it in a way he hadn't expected. In the later messages, around day 2 and 3, the tone changed. He sounded less angry and more frightened. He said he didn't know what to do. He said Brittany was talking about getting her own attorney. He said he missed me. That one, the one where he said he missed me. That one, the one where he said he missed me, I played 3 times. I sat in that hotel room and I thought about my boy at 6 years old, building model airplanes at the kitchen table while Linda made dinner. I thought about teaching him to drive in an empty parking lot when he was 15. I thought about the look on his face when he got his acceptance letter from UT. I thought about all of it, and then I put the phone down. I am not made of stone. I want to be clear about that too. This cost me something. It costs me something still. There is no version of this story where I chalk it up as a clean win and move on without carrying it. A man who watches his son choose wrong and has to act against that in order to protect himself. That man doesn't sleep easily. That man sits with it. But I also knew what I'd heard on Thanksgiving night. I knew what Brittany had said. And I knew that the version of Daniel I missed, the boy building model airplanes, was not the same person who had heard those words from his wife and said nothing, done nothing. I returned home on December 28th, after Daniel and Brittany had arranged temporary accommodations with one of Brittany's cousins. The house was in reasonable shape. A few things were out of place. One of Linda's decorative plates, a blue and white thing she'd bought at the craft fair in Asheville the year before she got sick, was cracked. I don't know if it was an accident or not. I prefer to think it was an accident. I walked through the room slowly. I stood in the living room and I looked at where my recliner had been pushed into the corner. I pulled it back to the center of the room, in front of the television, where it belonged. I called Phil that evening. He confirmed everything was proceeding as filed. Then I called my financial advisor. We discussed the final structure of the trust. As it stood, my estate, the house, the investment accounts, a small life insurance policy, totaled approximately $2.4 million. I directed the house to go to a local affordable housing nonprofit with the condition that it be converted to family housing units. I directed the investment accounts to be split between the Shriners Hospital for Children, which had cared for a nephew of mine years ago, and a veterans assistance organization in Knoxville that I'd been quietly donating to for years. I left Daniel a sum I won't disclose here. It was not nothing. But it was not what he would have expected. I did not leave Brittany anything. My attorney had the documents witnessed and notarized on the 30th of December. Daniel called me on New Year's Eve. I answered this time. The conversation was short. He said he wanted to talk about what had happened. I said I was willing to talk, but not that night. I told him to come by the house on the 2nd when things had settled. He said okay. He came. We sat at the kitchen table, the two of us, with coffee. Brittany wasn't with him, which I took as a sign that he'd decided to show up as my son rather than as her husband. That mattered to me. He said he was sorry. He said things had gotten out of hand and he hadn't handled it well. He didn't defend Brittany, which was the first time in 2 years I'd seen him fail to do that. I told him I accepted the apology. I meant it. I also told him I wasn't going to reverse what I'd done with the estate. He started to say something. I held up a hand gently, and I said, "Daniel, listen to me. I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting what I built. There's a difference. What happens with you and Brittany going forward is between you and her. But my house, my money, those are mine to do with as I decide, and I've decided. That's not going to change." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Okay, Dad. I don't know what happens next with Daniel and me. We've had dinner twice since then. It's careful, both of us stepping lightly, but it's something. I think about Linda and what she'd say. I think she'd be heartbroken about all of it. I also think she'd say that a man who doesn't protect what he's built isn't being noble. He's being careless. Linda was practical that way beneath all her warmth. I'm 68 years old. I have a paid-off house and a quiet life and coffee on the back porch in the morning. I have a trust document that reflects what I actually value and who I actually want to support when I'm gone. I have a notebook in my desk drawer that I haven't needed to write in for several months. And I have my recliner back in the center of the room, right where it belongs. I still think about the cracked plate. That blue and white piece Linda brought home from a craft fair in Asheville. She'd carried it wrapped in her sweater all the way back in the car, laughing about how she didn't want to trust it to a bag, something that small, something that specific, sitting there broken on the shelf when I came home on the 28th. I'll never know if it was careless or intentional. I've made peace with not knowing. But I think about it because it captures something true about what happened in that house over 2 years. When you let people who don't value what you've built move through your life without limits, things get broken. Not all at once. Gradually, a plate here, a boundary there, a piece of yourself you don't notice is gone until the house is quiet again and you're standing in the middle of it taking inventory. I'm not angry at Daniel. I want to say that clearly because I think anger would be the easier thing to carry. Anger is clean. What I actually carry is more complicated. It's the grief of watching someone you raised make choices that reveal they've become a stranger to you in some important way. That's not Daniel's fault entirely. I was too slow to hold the line. I told myself it was love, and some of it was. But some of it was avoidance. There's a difference, and knowing the difference matters. What I've come to understand is that the choices Brittany made, the listening at doors, the car lease, the conversation on Thanksgiving night about waiting for me to have health issues, those weren't sudden. They were the natural end of a long pattern that I had allowed to develop by not being honest early enough about what I would and wouldn't accept under my own roof. Actions accumulate. Consequences follow from them. That's not a punishment from anywhere outside yourself. It's just how the world works, steadily and without exception. I think about what it took to get through those months, not the legal part. Phil handled most of that with competence and calm. I mean the internal part. The discipline of writing things down instead of exploding. The clarity to understand what I was actually dealing with before I acted on it. The will to sit at dinner and pass the salt and say nothing when everything in me wanted to say something. Because I knew that speaking too soon would cost me more than staying quiet a little longer. That kind of steadiness doesn't come from being cold. It comes from knowing what you stand for and deciding in advance that you're not going to compromise it out of fear or guilt or the desperate hope that things will fix themselves. They don't fix themselves. I've learned that. If you want your life to reflect your values, you have to build it that way, deliberately, one decision at a time. The trust documents. The revised will. The notebook in the drawer. None of that was dramatic. All of it was intentional. Daniel came to the table without Brittany that January morning. That was his choice, and I respected it. Whatever happens between them going forward is between them. But he showed up as my son, and that meant something. There's still a thread. I don't know how strong it is. I'm tending it carefully. The recliner is back in the center of the room. That's where Linda always said it looked right. She had good instincts about where things belonged. I'm learning, a little late maybe, to trust my own.